For those who might need it, this is a recap of the tragedy that is Amos Yee. I say this not at all in an attempt to justify his actions today, but to suggest that, Amos did not happen in a vacuum. The devils of his worst nature were instead stoked and inflamed by certain sins.
Those who desire attention, there are two ways to do it. One, you could be the best, to be so good at whatever you do that people cannot ignore you. Or you could be different, be something no one has ever seen before, and people will look at you just from sheer curiosity. In the case of Amos Yee, the latter is what he chose. He wasn't good at what he did. He wasn't likable. He wasn't smart. But by God, he was different.
Look, I love the Quran. Look at me. Look at me as I lick the Quran. Look at me as I lick the Quran.
Everyone could not help but look at him. Look at the things he did. Look at what he said. Look at what absurd antic he got himself into. All the while Amos screamed, "Look at me."
Look at me. Look at me as I make love. Look at me as I make... Look, I love the Quran. Look at me.
Amos loved every minute of it. That precious spotlight, constantly feeding his ego. Hate or love, compliments or insults, respect or contempt, doesn't matter. It was attention, and that is all that Amos needed. And whenever that spotlight wavered to something more interesting, Amos would escalate. Amos would say something more outrageous. Amos would shout even louder, do something that pushes the boundaries of basic human decency. Until one day, Amos just pushed too hard. He pushed against society so hard, said and did things beyond human decency that society had no choice but to shove him into the dirt. It destroyed him. It destroyed him so completely that Amos has no future, and he is only 20 years old. The story of Amos Yee, even by this channel's standards, is extraordinary. Nothing like it has happened before or since. Sit a while and listen to something that is simply different. The story of Amos Yee.
Greetings, fellow viewers. Welcome to magic. You've had the opportunity to cross into another dimension. A journey of both shadow and substance, of visions, where what you see is boundless and restricted to only that of imagination.
Amos's early years deserve a mention because his background will help define his internet antics. Amos was born in the city-state of Singapore in 1998, born in a time of economic wealth that Singapore had never seen before. A son of a computer engineer and a teacher, Amos was afforded every opportunity in life: a good education, a home, a group identity by being part of the Catholic Chinese community. He had no real wants in his life because his parents provided everything for him. His mother in particular coddled him to no end. Amos was spoiled.
Did they spoil you?
Did they spoil me? Well, what do you mean by that?
You know, like when you're growing up, only child, they gave you everything you wanted. You didn't have to work.
I think, sure. I led a kind of spoiled middle to upper class lifestyle, sure.
He had no conception of the sheer difficulty of life was before he was born, not just in Singapore, but the world. No appreciation for the sacrifices of not only his parents, but the previous generations of Singapore made to make his comfortable life possible. Amos is definitely one of the internet generation because all he truly inspired to be in life was an actor in film and a YouTube star, not a doctor, not a lawyer, not a teacher. Amos aspired to make YouTube videos. Because Amos was spoiled beyond measure by his parents, and even by the age of 13, his ego was already absurdly large. It was this ego that ostracized him from the other students at his local school. Amos did not belong. He did not fit in. It was every kid's worst nightmare. Amos would argue it was because of his American accent.
I speak in an American accent, which I was like heavily ostracized for while in Singapore because they speak in their own little accents.
This is not true, and a rationalization after the fact for Amos to come to terms with what actually happened. Amos did not fit in is because he was insufferable, unlikable, and delusional. The value in which Amos held his intelligence,
Hello!
his talent,
This video was made by the legendary Amos Yee.
his ability would have turned him off other children his age who instinctively sensed there was something clearly wrong with him. Because of Amos's social isolation from his peers, he found validation in a relatively new technology called the internet, where he found a whole world of people who not only shared his interests, but also shared that sense of belonging. So instead of making real friends in Singapore, he dug deeper and deeper into the quagmire of the internet. Amos claims he started using social media at an early age of 8, which may have provided a temporary escape from the crushing loneliness, but would only exacerbate his antisocial behavior. Amos Yee had a near obsession with American culture and style. Even at this early age, Amos clearly thought American culture was superior to Chinese.
It's like somebody from China said, "Hey, America has a new year and we don't have one. Oh, let's quickly copy that idea and then make it a festive season for us." Yeah, after all, we've been copying America for food, cars, machines, and other stuff, so no hard doing it here.
What made you come here to the U.S.? Instead of going somewhere else, why here?
Ever since I was a kid, I was largely influenced by American culture. Yeah, because it seemed like Americans are more my kind of people.
This fascination with Western culture is normal for a child of an international city like Singapore, Hong Kong, Shenzhen, Bangkok, and Tokyo, since American movies, music, and brands dominate the landscape. But Amos was different. Compared to the generations before, Amos almost exclusively got his American influence from the internet.
Largely influenced by American culture, from the internet.
Not film or music, the internet, specifically YouTubers. The Amazing Atheist was apparently a fundamental figure in Amos's early development.
So what actually inspired you to do this in the first place? Why did you feel the need to do it?
Yeah, I'm like heavily motivated by the Amazing Atheist.
Oh, really?
He's probably, as of now, like the biggest influence to my work.
Because I've watched many atheist videos, and from like, you know, The Amazing Atheist and Cult of Dusty, like those are my favorite atheist YouTubers.
I was a Catholic.
A Catholic. And what caused you to become an atheist 2 years ago?
Mostly propaganda from The Amazing Atheist. You know about him?
No.
The Amazing Atheist was a guy halfway across the world from California named T.J. Kirk, who rose to prominence for his videos criticizing religion. Amos was amongst the first to come of age when regular people were media icons. That is what TJ was, an early example of a long line of media icons that our kids today are growing up on. PewDiePie, Markiplier, iDubbbz, Keemstar would come later for the generations after Amos. While Amos was undoubtedly fascinated by America and its culture, YouTube provided a warped representation of what the United States actually is. For a young Amos Yee, America was T.J. Kirk railing against religion in his garage or bedroom. In many ways, it reflected Amos's own life, because Amos was dissatisfied with the hand he was dealt. Unhappy with his church, and the Amazing Atheist provided an outlet for this dissatisfaction. He was also unhappy with society and the restrictions placed upon him, and TJ's F the system, my way or the highway attitude would have appealed to a small child who did not fit in. Amos came to believe that his problems were not because of the flaws of his character, but because of external influences. Society was to blame. I can't stress this enough. This has never really happened before, which is what makes Amos' childhood so interesting. Never in human history has this happened before. The idea that a man who made YouTube videos in his bedroom or garage could dominate the early childhood of a person halfway across the world, it's simply unheard of in any generation that preceded it. This was only made possible by modern technology, the internet. Ultimately, Amos's media diet and social isolation made for a clearly troubled child who pushed up and rebelled against the institutions of Singapore. The rebellion started with his parents, but would soon spread to every other aspect of his life. For one, he was forced to leave his church because of his constant profanity. Another incident was when, at a school assembly, he was forced to publicly apologize to the Chinese students for denigrating Chinese New Year. Amos never learnt from these experiences, because he would often post on his budding YouTube channel to get in that final word.
No. What really f***ed me up was when I was compelled, at least I thought I was compelled, to make an apology in front of the whole school pertaining to the Chinese New Year video. Now I'm just gonna say that if you watch my Chinese New Year video and you're insulted by it, if you do, you are fucking stupid. I'm sorry, but if your values and your established beliefs are insulted by that video, you are fucking stupid.
From that clip, you get a general sense of how Amos thinks of himself. Amos is smart, and if you disagree with him, you are dumb. Because Amos believes that if he is right, then Amos is ultimately justified in his behavior. This is crucial to understand if you want to understand Amos Yee. Amos truly believes that anything he says or does is ultimately justified so long as he thinks his logic meets an acceptable standard. But who ultimately decides if Amos' argument is valid? Well, Amos, of course. The entirety of Amos's life is him saying something incredibly stupid, getting immediately corrected, then rationalizing to himself that his stupidity was acceptable because he somehow convinced himself that he was technically right. It was a perfect circle of narcissism. This is why Amos had no friends. His peers sensed this flaw in his character and avoided him because of it. But since children can't verbalize this complicated social dynamic, they would go for general insults, including Amos's accent. Self-centered behavior is common in children, especially ones as emotionally stunted like Amos. But even at the age of 13, he demonstrated his emotional intelligence was the equivalent of a 6-year-old. For a normal child, it was a dangerous situation, but things should have turned out okay. Already, the institutions of society, such as the school and church, were working to force it out of him through discipline and punishment, eventually disincentivizing these attention-seeking behaviors. But circumstances would soon be out of society's control, as Amos got his first major break on his dream of becoming a film and YouTube star.
I give you the award, no! I take back.
Irene, please don't traumatize
That was a look of disgust, I believe. Yeah. You must grab them when they are still young, you know.
Amos's first real brush with fame and attention was when he entered a first film fest competition in 2011 created by a major local paper.
Boys, we got something bad going on.
Please elaborate further.
Jen, my best friend, she has cancer.
The short film was titled Jan, which he self-directed, wrote, and shot entirely in his bedroom. Jan is about several selfish friends trying to scrounge up money for a friend who has cancer. It wasn't a particularly good video. In fact, it was terrible.
I will blow your ass right up to Green Hill Zone.
That's just a ukulele.
Bam, Jerry!
It didn't have to be good. Amos won the film fest because he was different. He won because he showed promise and potential, not competence, which is what a first film fest is about. The video is striking for several reasons. For one is his absurdly young age. He would have only been about 11 or 12 when this film was made. Simply not something you see every day. From that perspective, Amos had huge public relations potential for the newspaper that was running the contest. One of the unspoken reasons why he won.
You must grab them when they are still young, you know.
The second thing is that Amos performs all the characters. At the time, this was a feather in his cap because Amos is able to perform several characters with cartoonish but distinct personalities. But with hindsight, it's really kind of sad. This is a video that a child makes with his friends on a sleepover, but Amos didn't have any friends, so he had to make this video alone and play all the parts.
Jen, my best friend, she has cancer.
The final thing that made him different is his unusual mastery of the English language and an American accent. For anyone who's had the fortune to live abroad in ethnically Chinese communities, such as Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, parts of Thailand, you would have noticed that those who speak English as a second language often struggle to understand the subtext of English conversations. Metaphors, similes, sarcasm, idioms completely go over their head. Ethnic Chinese take the English language very literally. Singapore is better than most, but even by Singaporean standards, Amos' understanding of this subtext exceeds the average Singaporean at age 11. It made him different from the other contestants. It made him marketable. Film is an American-dominated industry, and when the judges saw a young child with a mastery of the English language, they could not help but take notice. It was beneficial for the paper because they could sell this image of a Singaporean youth who was interested in film outside of the targeted demographic. The story had potential to go viral outside of Singapore. It didn't, but that was one of the reasons why he won. It is an early example of Amos Yee being used by people who were far smarter than he was, with long-term strategies which Amos was completely incapable of conceiving, let alone executing. The American accent is also difficult to explain. At this stage, Amos had never lived in the West. He claims that he learnt it from American movies. I think it's more likely has to do with his near-obsessive, addiction-level use of the internet and social media, watching endless videos of the American atheists which were all the rage when he was growing up. Amos sought to emulate them. We do know the accent is artificial, and Amos has had very brief slips, particularly when he was angry. It noticeably changed to a typical Asian accent.
Also, I like how when you get riled up, you go really fast and you go into a cliche Asian voice.
Isn't that funny? I am.
It is fucking hilarious. You break down a little bit and get into the fucking cliche Asian voice.
Whatever the case, the American accent was just another thing that made Amos different, and the judges of the contest would have taken notice. When Amos won the contest, it was a massive boon to his career, but he still displayed the arrogance and petulance of his early childhood.
I think I've proven that low-budget films can be really good. Yeah!
Don't you think it would be nice to get some cool actors, since there are so many characters in your show, right?
Depending on whether the actors are good and they're cooperative. Because I don't want to work with uncooperative actors. So.
Would you want to work with Irene?
Depending on the film that we're shooting, if it's good, then yeah, I would like to work with her.
In this context, it was played for laughs. It is genuinely amusing to see a 11 to 13-year-old claim he won't do a movie with a famous actor if the film is no good. The presenters just assumed he would grow out of it. Amos was still young, and it was cute. It made people laugh even though Amos clearly did not comprehend why people were laughing. This will have devastating consequences that will only be apparent years later. Amos did not learn proper human social behavior, but his bad antisocial behaviors were encouraged by the media. Make no mistake, he kept this arrogance to this day, and now that Amos is in his 20s, it is far, far less cute. This was the point in Amos's life that sowed the seeds of his own self-destruction, the beginning of the long decline because he was no longer being corrected for his behavior. Amos learned all the wrong lessons from this experience. All these people telling Amos how special he was, how talented he is, how much promise he showed. Since he was so young, he could not recognize that the reason he won this award was not because his film was good or even competent. It was because he was different. Because of his age, his accent, his unusual mastery of the English language. This award was meant to encourage him, make him realize that if he worked hard, he might achieve greatness. But in Amos's mind, he already achieved greatness. It went to his head, and is still with him to this day.
Activists, you are sick of you and your friends being discriminated, and you want to change the world. And these techniques, I think, have been standard, universal techniques for any effective activist of any topic all around the world. Number 1, tailoring your activism towards a mass audience.
After winning the contest, Amos got the attention of a well-known Singaporean film director by the name of Jack Neo. Jack was mostly interested in the fact Amos could speak English and offered Amos a role in a major Singaporean film called, translated to English, We Not Naughty. It is barely worth mentioning beyond the fact this represented the height of Amos's acting career. He would continuously chase the spotlight to no avail. Even at this incredibly early stage, the novelty of Amos Yee was wearing thin, and he would look for attention by redoubling his efforts onto YouTube. He tried everything: movie reviews, politics, a comedy video on Singlish. He tried to appeal both to Singapore and the West, which only muddled his message. Over the course of his attempts, he rarely broke the 2,000 view mark. Amos soon learnt, however, that the best way to get attention was to be as profane and outrageous as possible. For the first time on the internet, he would escalate his behavior. In 2012, at the age of 13 to 14, Amos creates a video where he criticizes the concept of Chinese New Year as simply a copy of the American New Year.
Country Singapore, we celebrate Chinese New Year on February, which I don't get. We already have a New Year, so why do we have Chinese New Year? It's like somebody from China said, hey, America has a New Year and we don't have one. Zodiac? Yeah, because every time I go to a zoo, I always want to act. So let's just call it the signs of the Zodiac. Yeah, now nobody will figure out that we ripped off New Year. Let's spread the word. All I'm saying is that it really doesn't make sense to me because it's just rehashing the same idea again.
Which is shockingly ill-informed, especially for someone who is ethnically Chinese. But it is typical of Amos to push out opinions that have no basis in reality or facts. The boy, and later the man, is rarely informed in almost anything he talks about. Amos would later claim his lack of knowledge of Chinese New Year was simply satire, which I do not believe. It was damage control after the fact to quell rumors that he might just be stupid. The video is significantly toned down from what will come next, but it's important because it was formative. Amos learnt from this experience the more outrageous he could be, the more attention and rewards he would receive. Naturally, the people of Singapore did not take this misinformation kindly, and criticized him harshly.
19 complaints to 20 complaints. Okay. Regarding a boy called Amos Yee. Famous! Famous Yee. He has been posting a lot of irresponsible content.
So I wanna be famous. So I set up my own YouTube channel to pursue my career online. So the secret is, the more controversial your topic is, I don't go to Chinese New Year to take and pow. Oh really? The more outrageous you speak, so why should you drop out of school? The more you swear, I tell you the higher your viewership is.
But he got that attention. The video got something along the lines of 150,000 views. The spotlight for a brief moment was on Amos. For a brief moment, Amos had everything he could ever want. His local school forced him to apologize for his insult to the Chinese people, but that didn't matter. It was an acceptable cost. Amos now had the tools to get the validation he craved.
Who you need to influence is not people in power, but the masses. From any civil rights movement of the past, from blacks to gays, how you get permanent long-term change is if you are able to get majority of the people in the world to believe your ideas. The level of English in the masses is pretty much like a 4th to 6th grade level. If you write it in above a college level, of course you will not be able to effectively communicate your ideas.
In 2015, Lee Kuan Yew, a titan in Singaporean politics, died at the age of 91. As the first Prime Minister of Singapore, he was, and is, viewed as the essential figure for the rapid rise of Singapore as one of the financial capitals of the world. Even though he had long since retired, he was a respected and beloved figure in many areas of Singaporean society. 1.7 million Singaporeans, out of a population of 5.5, visited his coffin. But not Amos Yee. At the age of 16, Amos would do something incredibly stupid. In another massive escalation, would make a video not only denigrating Lee Kuan Yew. In a profanity-ridden speech, Amos argues that Lee's success was not real, and in fact he had run the country into the ground, that he is glad that Lee is dead.
Lee Kuan Yew is dead, finally. Why hasn't anyone said, "Fuck yeah, the guy is dead"? Everyone is afraid that if they say something like that, they might get into trouble, because everyone is scared. But I'm not afraid.
And even alludes that Lee Kuan Yew was equal to some of the worst dictators in human history.
He is undoubtedly totalitarian. Now, seeing what Lee Kuan Yew has done, I'm sure many individuals who have done similar things comes to mind.
Which is ridiculous. To top it all off, Amos then argues that Lee Kuan Yew was like an unflattering Jesus Christ, who pretended to be nice, but in reality were evil liars.
But I'm going to compare him to someone that people haven't really mentioned before. Jesus.
The next day, Amos would then post a photoshopped image on his blog of Lee Kuan Yew having anal sex with Margaret Thatcher, which may sound amazing, but words cannot describe what a low effort and disappointing Photoshop it was. Singaporeans who saw the video and the photoshopped image reported it to the Singaporean police, who acted swiftly and arrested Amos. Fairly or not, for the first time in Amos's life, he was facing real consequences for his actions. I want to take this moment to explain what exactly happened. Why did the Singaporean state react so harshly? Because it may seem unthinkable in the West. Singapore is a successful multiracial society built by Lee Kuan Yew and his successors. A city consisting of Christians and Muslims, Chinese and Malays, Hindus and Buddhists. These groups have a long history of conflict and violence in almost all places they meet, except Singapore. This was achieved through strict regulations of criticism that applied to all groups, not just Christians.
What are our priorities? First, the welfare, the survival of the people.
Degradation of people's belief, regardless of faith, have the same restrictions. Islam, Christianity, Hindus, all the same. If it was a religion, you could not criticize it. This is one of the defining features of the Singaporean state. Singapore has an aggressive, making money at all costs philosophy through FDI, foreign direct investments, and nothing scares those investors away faster than a religious or ethnic conflict. From the state's perspective, Singapore's future success is entirely dependent on all these different groups getting along. As a result, Singapore can best be described as a nanny state, where all aspects of Singaporeans' lives are heavily regulated, including freedom of speech.
It is remorse that we wouldn't be here, we would not have made the economic progress if we had not intervened on very personal matters. Who your neighbor is, how you live, the noise you make, how you spit or where you spit, or what language you use. Had we not done that and done it effectively, we would not be here today.
Amos went after Christians to sow discord for attention, potentially threatening that peace. That is why Amos Yee was arrested for, quote, wounding the feelings of Christians, unquote. Nothing is more important to Singapore than maintaining this social harmony. You may not agree with Singapore's methods, but their spectacular economic success in the last 50 years cannot be ignored. That said, even by this country's standards, it was a massive bureaucratic overcorrection to arrest Amos Yee. Singapore is not Pakistan. It was highly unusual for the state to go after someone so young and with very little power.
His case was unprecedented in many ways. Amos achieved worldwide attention when, as a 16-year-old, he was charged for sedition and blasphemy in what was a very transparent attempt to silence and punish a teenager for the crime of daring to publish his own rants on YouTube.
I suspect this was likely because of the organizational chaos following Lee Kuan Yew's death rather than powerful people wanting to silence a 16-year-old's opinions. But even if that's the case, this issue spoke to a larger one about freedom of speech, which was fiery in 2015. The West, particularly the so-called skeptics, took up Amos's story of one where the state was trying to restrict his right to speak.
Why are you gonna make a video about me?
About you?
Yeah.
God, you make yourself sound so important. It's not like you're just going to jail for free speech, aren't you? It's not anything that bad, is it?
Jail in Singapore. Here, Amos Yee kind of burst onto the YouTube commentator, you could call it skeptic scene, so to speak.
Amos became a martyr for free speech activists across America, United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia, who believed atheists' free speech rights were being restricted across the planet. Overnight, Amos became nothing short of a freedom of expression icon due to this incident, and the attention, well, that was next level.
So, I'm sat with Amos Yee, an 18-year-old Singaporean blogger who has spent time in jail for his controversial opinions.
Hello. Hello, everyone,
Hello.
and welcome. I'm here with Amos Yee, someone I
Amos?
very much admire. Amos.
Seriously, you're a brave warrior for all the right things, and anything I can do for you, please let me know.
Just spread the word.
All of a sudden, high-profile human rights activists, lawyers, and YouTubers were taking up Amos's case as a fight between freedom of speech and authoritarianism.
Personally, the case of Amos Yee is really interesting because we have this tendency, especially in the West, to really like it when a young person speaking their mind says things that we agree with, especially when it comes to activism or politics, that sort of thing. We get excited because we, especially in America, but I think the West, but especially in America, we have this thing where when we see someone who is much younger than us espousing the types of political views that we are very, very aggressively for, it's almost like drugs to us.
This argument is complete nonsense. The reason why Amos was selected by this man, the skeptics and activists all over the world, is because they sensed a political opportunity to push forth their own worldview. They knew that since Amos was a child, they would get more press. They knew because Amos was fluent in English, his message would compress better in the West than if he only spoke Mandarin. A story of a young kid persecuted for non-religious beliefs sells better than if Amos was an adult.
You must grab them when they're still young, you know.
It was politics, not a completely absurd, unspoken cultural affinity towards children who share our opinions. That was a rationalization after the fact, a reason for this man to justify why they as a group ignored the obvious and numerous ethical lapses in judgment by using a mentally ill child to push forward their worldview, particularly when it would blow up in their faces a few years later. That is the real reason Amos was selected out of the literally tens of thousands of prisoners of conscience. To put it simply, they were exploiting Amos for their own benefit.
That's the dark side of doing this kind of shit. This is the ugly thing. This is why idealistic movements fail. Is because idealistic movements believe in the intrinsic value of what they're doing, and they believe that will simply shine through in everything they do and say. Meanwhile, those who unfortunately win are the dirty, underhanded Machiavellian readers of Robert Greene who understand that the masses require manipulation in order for guidance.
Yes, hello, I'm a big fan of Robert Greene. I read a lot of his work.
Amos was the vehicle to spread their worldview, and they took the opportunity regardless of ethical concerns or consequence. As a result, Amos once again got that negative reinforcement loop, telling him that being as outrageous as possible was appropriate, that everything he was doing was okay. Any efforts his parents or schools attempted to reform his behavior was undermined by journalists and skeptics in the West. Put yourself in Amos's shoes. You're 16, and you have people in America, Australia, the United Kingdom, Canada, telling you, all of them, that you are nothing short of a hero for making a YouTube video.
Seriously, you're a brave warrior for all the right things, and anything I can do for you, please let me know.
Just spread the word, Ruben, spread the word, and that's all I need.
Is it any wonder he came out becoming more arrogant than ever? The government of Singapore attempted to show mercy by Amos by offering him a plea deal in which he would have avoided jail time, and Amos arrogantly rejected the offer and received a prison sentence of 4 weeks that was backdated.
Concision, which is a technique I learned from The Amazing Atheist. Concision means phrasing your words in a way that is the most powerful in the least amount of words possible.
My favorite thing about Amos Yee is by far the pictures people take of him. No matter how hard he tries, no matter what he's doing, he always looks like a smug little moron in every photo he is in. It is hilarious. This one right here was taken in May, just after Amos was found guilty for the crime he committed. He had just been convicted of a crime, and he's behaving like a celebrity in front of the cameras. Look at that little smile that never seems to leave his face. He always has this weird twitch in his mouth telling you how special he thinks he is. If Amos had a little more awareness, he would stop the behavior because he looks ridiculous. The guy has literally millions of photos taken of him, and there are almost none where he expresses happiness, sadness, regret, or any other human emotion beyond this undeserved smugness. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because there's one major exception to the rule. When reality breaks into Amos's life, when something happens that not even his mummy, the skeptics, could bail him out of. The kid clearly thought he was just so special, that the state of Singapore would tolerate his mockery of their authority. That, of course, did not happen. When Singapore handed down a prison sentence of 4 weeks in July of 2015, the photos that came from it are nothing short of amazing. These photos and video are the only time when we see Amos Yee, the human, stripped of this stupid egotism and narcissism, expressing emotions beyond them. For the first and perhaps only time, we see the true Amos Yee, a scared kid fighting against things he barely understands, holding his arms across his chest as if wounded by a spear, supporting his shopping bag as if it were his guts, ready to spill out in front of the millions of cameras, clicking away with a direct link to the rest of the world. His face is downcast to the pavement. Look at his eyes. Look at the fear. Look at how hard he is trying not to cry, trying so hard to be brave. Amos is not even looking where he's going. Amos is allowing his mother to guide him, praying to God that he reaches his car with its black-tinted windows before he bawls his eyes out in front of the planet. All the attention in the world in this one moment, and all Amos could think about was just some privacy to cry. It's just so raw. It's just so human. It's such a powerful image to see him humbled in such a way, to see something Amos has spent his entire life trying to hide. But we see you now, Amos Yee. If the moment when Amos Yee was set on the path of destruction was when he received his award for his film, then this was the moment where he could have turned it all around, to commit to being a better person, to realize that it did not ultimately matter if he was justly or unjustly imprisoned. These are things we as individual humans cannot control, and all we control is the choices we make. Amos Yee made the wrong choices in his life, but this was his only chance to turn it around. In desperation, Amos promised the judge that he would never reoffend. One of the reasons why his sentence was so short. He already made the first step in changing his life by committing to the bench a change in life choices. If only he would keep it. But that, of course, is not what happened. For many reasons, Amos learned nothing from this experience. In fact, he learned the exact opposite. What he should have learned was that if he kept pushing up against Singaporeans' institutions, they were gonna push back hard. Amos Yee was sentenced to jail, and the outpouring of outrage from the West and a small group of Singaporean activists was explosive. Amnesty International declared him the youngest prisoner of conscience on the planet. High-profile human rights activists such as Melissa Chen took up Amos's case. A figure who we soon shall see provided essential legal support. While in America, YouTubers were making videos about this injustice. Everywhere Amos looked, he saw validation, and he likely convinced himself that he did nothing wrong. And poof, that moment of humanity was gone. That moment of introspection and regret, gone. Amos would instead continue this path of self-destruction by escalating his behavior once again and push against Singapore's institutions.
Alhamdulillah, motherfuckers. It is I, Amos, with another episode of Amos Yee. This, bred from Muhammad's God-given anus, scavenged from the Holy Land, Lord of the Andals, first of his name. Where the f*** is the police? I love you. I am stoned.
In November 2015, just when that spotlight was starting to waver, Amos Yee would release a video about Islam, and it is nothing short of a train wreck. Once again, Amos escalated his behavior, where not only he criticized Islam as a backwards religion, not only does he allude to and mock the potential police action, and by doing so making a mockery of their authority,
I am so going to be sent to jail for this.
Amos also breaks the legal promise he made to the judge in his first trial. In the video, Amos actually purchased a Quran, which he uses in the climax of his video. Amos does not only lick it and rip it, Amos also thought it would be a good idea to place this Quran on his bed while he is furiously humping it. Amos simulates extreme sexual pleasure as an equivalent to an average Muslim's commitment to Allah. During these acts, however, there is a crucial Freudian slip. Each time Amos performs this sacrilege, Amos would say the phrase, "Look at me."
I love the Quran. Look, I love the Quran. Look at me. Look at me as I lick. Look at me as I look at me. Look at me as I make love to the Quran.
Amos never cared about the rights or wrongs of Islam. Attention is all that really mattered. The final word of the video is Amos saying, "I am so going to jail for this."
I am so going to be sent to jail for this.
It's intended to sound ironic, but for those who are more self-aware, the tone is clearly hopeful. Amos knows that this is simply something the police of Singapore cannot ignore. Is Amos really so egotistical to think that the government of Singapore, its police, or its people care about what Amos thinks of Islam? Quite frankly, they had far more important things to do. Singapore has a strict, fair application of the law. They simply could not ignore this video when they prosecuted Amos for the Christian video. Amos, once again, with no regards for his own life, pushed up against Singapore's institutions, and this time, they were going to grind him into the dirt. Notice the escalation. It makes the anti-Christian video look like a Saturday cartoon, trying to repeat the success of the Christian video by being more outrageous and more ridiculous. This is the point when the free speech activists needed to seriously think if they wanted Amos Yee to be a standard bearer for their cause. The child was a liability, but no one, especially Melissa Chen, Jeff Holiday, Sargon of Akkad, Dave Rubin, and hundreds of others seem to care, but they should have known better. The crimes by Singaporean standards were extreme. They were serious. It was stupidity on the part of Amos that I cannot just explain by attention-seeking. Let's for one moment put aside the obvious freedom of speech issues. Put aside the issue if this act was right or wrong, and talk about Amos Yee's mental state, because it is relevant. It was a consistent point of contention in court. The state of Singapore consistently showed serious concern for his mental health, especially during his first incarceration. Innumerable court psychiatrists and psychologists evaluated Amos, and the picture was not rosy. Many concluded the boy needed some sort of professional help. There was a general sense within Singapore that there was something really wrong with him. I will argue that it comes down to three things. The first is his crippling addiction to the internet. When Amos Yee was arrested by police, confiscated an enormous amount of items that connect to the internet. Confiscated items include 5 phones, 7 laptops, 1 desktop computer, 6 cameras, and 3 tripods. The total estimate of all the products by Amos himself was 16,000 American dollars, which is absurd. Amos clearly spends unhealthy amount of time on the internet and its feedback loop to provide him the validation he needs.
And people like me have to help defend people like you and amplify your voice.
The second reason is Amos Yee is mentally handicapped. I am convinced Amos Yee is a moron.
The reason why I have such a big problem with Amos Yee is he's a rat. He's a spoiled, obnoxious little brat who has no conceptual understanding of what he's been doing. Amos, you really don't know what you're talking about. I don't think you've ever really known what you're talking about.
Admittedly led to developing blind spots and biases. For example, I think his brilliance and genius have been vastly overstated. Everyone who has ever handled this kid has known how difficult and erratic he is, and how frankly, the more you get to know him, the more you realize that he possesses almost zero redeeming qualities, and even worse, almost no capacity to learn or correct course.
It's not in a, I dislike him, therefore he is stupid. No. It is in, I believe he has an inferior brain capacity to typically functioning humans of his age. This applies not only in 2015, but today in 2019. Amos Yee is intellectually and emotionally handicapped. In 2015, it may have not been obvious, but the more you watch of Amos Yee, the more you get a sense that he has little to no clue of the concepts being talked about. His age, accent, and eloquence gave the impression of intelligence. Being bilingual, for example, correlates to most people's minds as an indicator of intelligence. But when people spoke to Amos directly, in real life, a different picture emerges. When the skeptics and human rights activists would meet Amos in his cell, they would find a kid who would not take legal advice, was obstinate, hostile, and unbelievably arrogant, and generally showed no will to change. A far cry from his YouTube videos, which were all about rational inquiry and free thinking. In fact, Amos treated the people who tried to help him very badly. The most major example of this is when Amos accused his bailer of sexual molestation. It was an untrue allegation, and Amos would change his story endlessly.
But all I want to know, and I've got like 2 minutes left here, why did you lie about him molesting you?
And why did you say that people making Patreon accounts is bad? What is wrong with crowdfunding? Fine. I myself already apologized for falsely accusing somebody of molest. I don't care about
your apology. Why did you lie?
The reason why Amos actually did it seems to be a combination of petty revenge against the bailer and an attempt for media attention. The bailer in question, Vincent Law, put the money forward that Amos needed to get out of prison, obviously and reasonably, since it was Mr. Law's money at risk. He had certain demands Amos needed to adhere to in order for his continued support. Amos, being completely self-involved, not only rejected his kindness, but made an untrue accusation so reprehensible, so short-sighted, that I can only conclude it was the actions of a moron. Amos's young age does not explain this. Treating the people who try to help you this badly, especially when they had the expertise and resources that you do not, is not the actions of a smart person.
And this is actually very relevant too, because this blog post was written a day after he got caught in the lie and had to say that he was extremely remorseful for the false claim. Yeah, take that to heart here. Amos Yee did a false rape allegation, and he admitted it. And then, when called on it, one day later tries to justify it. Just to simply spread falsehoods. None of this is very internally consistent. This sounds like the actions of an incredibly arrogant, bratty little child.
The anti-Islam video and the events that preceded it, however, are the clearest sign that Amos is stupid. There's more going on here than just Amos's criticism of Islam. Amos has been making critical comments about Islam for months before this video was released, and the Singaporeans did not step in. No, they stepped in for two reasons. One, Amos goaded the police, making a mockery of their authority. But more importantly, Amos broke his promise to the judge to not reoffend. Amos disrespected the bench. And there is one rule in life that everyone knows. You do not disrespect the bench. That is why the Singaporeans stepped in. They could turn a blind eye for most of the things Amos was doing, but they simply could not ignore the breaking of a legal promise. A smart person would know not to break this rule. Amos did. It was moronic, a mistake that nearly cost him everything. The third and final ingredient to this self-destructive cocktail that was Amos Yee's life was his crippling narcissism. Amos wanted to be seen as the most talented, the smartest, the most gifted boy on the internet, and he took great care to appear so in his videos. But he wasn't any of these things. He wasn't smart, nor was he gifted. He simply had none of the talent required to maintain an audience for long periods of time. Amos needed that audience. The emotional energy they had, it gave himself self-esteem Amos couldn't make by himself. When people poured praise onto Amos as a free speech icon, it convinced him for a brief moment that he was actually the smartest boy in the room. But that feeling faded. The spotlight always shifts, and cold hard reality sets in with its low-end jobs, university exams, the rent being due, everything about life reminding you that you are in fact not God's gift to this earth. So instead of improving, Amos spent most of his childhood looking for that spotlight like a drug addict for his next fix, to cover up those feelings of complete inadequacy and incompetence in every aspect of Amos's life. The need for attention was pathological, a cycle of self-destructive behavior that would soon destroy him. In May 2016, Amos Yee was once again arrested by the Singaporean police, and this time the stakes were sky high. Thankfully for Amos, the human rights groups and the internet skeptics snapped to his defense. The amount of resources they provided to keep Amos out of prison was nothing short of extraordinary. Amos was looking at spending years in prison for his behavior, which made his escape from the country all the more necessary. Enter Melissa Chen, one of the many activists who used Amos to grind her axe against the state of Singapore.
The human rights NGOs and the press were not alone in all of this. For many activists, Amos was a vessel into which we all poured our individual grievances into, with the hopes that he would embody those issues close to our heart and transcend local awareness and into the limelight of global imagination.
Melissa gave Amos documents necessary for him to seek asylum in the United States.
While he was still serving his sentence for wounding the feelings of his fellow countrymen in a YouTube video, and handed Amos some documents that would kickstart his asylum process.
And Amos fled the country.
So then he got out of jail and he was seeking asylum here in the United States. And many people like myself supported that notion, supported him coming here because of the persecution of his opinions. Then he got here. And it just there's no other real way to describe it other than it went to shit.
In late December 2016, Amos was detained by ICE in the United States. It turned out that Amos intentionally came to the United States illegally, and against advice from people like Melissa Chen.
And 6 months after he was seized and detained at the border, which by the way was a total screw-up on his part.
It turns out this was simply another ploy to get attention. He was trying to be the standard bearer for America's unfair legal system. This obviously did not work, and he was very upset by the fact that the Americans weren't happy he was there.
I'm quite disappointed that my arrest didn't become popular in America. There are only a few articles in the mainstream press about my case. I wanted my arrest to be as popular as Ahmad the Clock Boy, to shine light on how awful the immigration system is here. But sadly, it didn't happen. Out because of Trump hogging the limelight all the time. Somehow, in whoring attention.
He would spend the next 10 months or so in jail, and the United States government did not want him, for obvious reasons. But once again, an enormous amount of work and resources were spent to get him asylum in the United States. This is despite the fact that the flaws of his character were painfully apparent to anyone who worked with him. His incapacity to change, his low intelligence, his narcissism, his refusal to conform to society or authority should have been red flags in the asylum process by those who worked with him, but they had a free speech axe to grind, so they ignored it. It was through this effort Amos Yee officially got asylum in April 2017. There was jubilation by all those who invested in Amos's case. Free speech had won.
It went to shit.
All Amos's life, he pushed against Singapore's institutions, but now he was in America. With its right of freedom of speech, he had nothing to push up against. In fact, Amos had it made. If he played his cards right, he would never have to work for a living again. For the rest of his life, he could turn up at universities, free speech rallies, or atheist conventions talking about his experience and get paid. But he would never be the center of attention again. He will never become the object of hate or adoration of the internet, and that was intolerable for Amos Yee. Like clockwork, Amos pushed against the institutions again, but this time in America. But this was the final escalation that led to his destruction. In November of 2017, about 5 months after he got out of detention, Amos would release 3 videos detailing his support for pedophilia and how it should be legal in the United States.
Let's have a nice civil discussion on pedophilia.
Amos attempts to make the distinction a sexual relationship with children is possible if the child consents.
First, we need to agree on just one thing, that sexual abuse is not determined by age, but instead on whether or not the relationship involves consent.
These videos were explosive, and the story spread across the internet.
Amos Yee is a name that you seemingly can't escape from. Whether it's image boards or forums or websites or social media, it's everywhere. You trip over a fucking stone walking around the internet, you look down and there's little pear-shaped head Amos Yee looking up at you with fucking eyes and that really terrible haircut. And he wants to talk to you about babies.
This is where most of the audience was introduced to Amos, and let's just say he didn't put his best foot forward. For the next 6 months or so, Amos would continue pushing these ridiculous ideas. Amos would say repeatedly in tens of live streams that he believed that the age of consent should be lowered to 0.
Why do you think that kids and babies aren't able to consent to sex?
Amos went from live stream to live stream, talking about his new ideas. Some people entertained his ideas with an inappropriate level of support.
Mental block in their minds when they talk about this. You know, that sounds like you want adults to prey on children. But
exactly.
It's actually not as controversial as you think. For example, I think in the Netherlands, the age of consent is something like 12 or 14. So you're being treated like you're a terrible criminal, but that means the Dutch are terrible criminals as well.
Exactly.
So, well, look, it is an arbitrary choice, rather than based on like scientific evidence or something like that.
So I think it's completely fine if it's consensual.
Well,
yeah, definitely.
That's your opinion, and I hold different, and that's fine. And so any sex with a 5-year-old is rape. So what age would you set the age of consent law? Because there would have to be some kind of. Because otherwise, why would it go to a judge? You know, why would a judge?
I don't think you need that little arbitrary line of age.
It is arbitrary, that's true.
Yeah, exactly.
That was the exception. Most people were horrified and would challenge Amos's ideas. The thought that Amos might be doing this for attention never seemed to cross most of these people's minds. That was until a YouTuber named Mr. Medicare, someone who had no previous association with Amos, released a video saying that Amos is a troll.
And he wants to talk to you. That's been his kick. He likes to talk to kids. And now he's just recently uploaded a video saying that, holy shit, I'm getting kicked out of the house. And I don't buy any of it.
He has only several 100,000 subscribers, but his influence on the internet Discord far outreaches his subscriber count. When Mr. Medicare releases a video, other people take notice and take on his talking points. When other people called Amos a troll, it was ignored. But when Mr. Medicare called Amos a troll, it was a label Amos could never shake off. To this day, Amos Yee is seen as an attention-seeking troll because of this video, and it was devastating to his image.
Complete lie.
That's a speculation. You preemptively said, I think, with respect to what Jim...
Whatever, go watch the video Amos E in Cell Block C. He completely lied about me. Once again, Medicare, I can destroy you if you let me on. But yeah, that's why I had this new house. And he said that I was just lying, that I was kicked out, so... Okay, so everybody is calling me a troll, calling me incel, Jeff Holiday, Logic, whatever. It's completely incompetent in engaging with me. And I get why people could think I'm a troll, because, like, I have fun while advocating my ideas. I'm not like a super respectable, uptight academic.
The discourse had changed irrevocably, but Amos would continue to keep up this charade to the best of his abilities by going further and more extreme. This presented a problem for the skeptics that threw their support behind Amos. They had used Amos for their freedom of speech cause, and now were associated with him. They had an active hand in not only promoting him, but bringing Amos into America. Hence, they were directly responsible for the things he did there. Now Amos was out of their control, and he continued to grow more and more unstable. This reflected poorly on the skeptics. Most of them, like rats, abandoned Amos. They pretended Amos did not exist anymore.
Nearly as much attention for it. In fact, he became, in some ways, very blacklisted. Those videos came out, and pretty much everybody on the internet, aside from a few, and shout-outs to those who did address it, kind of threw their hands up and were like, you know what? I'm not talking about this. No.
They sucked this child dry of all his usefulness, and now he was a liability. This abandonment would cascade from person to person, as Amos lost all his allies in the human rights, skeptic, and atheist spheres. The most important would be Melissa Chen, the woman who handed the papers that Amos needed to receive asylum in America. Melissa Chen released a video on the 10th of December 2018, where she basically washes her hands of Amos Yee. The video is shocking because the things Melissa admits to, it makes you wonder, how could such a group of people be so irresponsible? In every moment of the video, I wonder if she is incompetent, stupid, or lazy.
Erratic he is, and how frankly, the more you get to know him, the more you realize that he possesses almost zero redeeming qualities. And even worse, almost no capacity to learn or correct course. Sure, there were signs of precociousness in his early videos, but he was molded in a system that was extremely hostile to any remote semblance of non-conformity. And he faced pushback from every aspect of his Singaporean life, from his family, school, social circle. So his neurodivergent idiosyncrasies, instead of being encouraged creatively and intellectually, were constantly suppressed and coerced into submission.
This is not true. The idea that Amos only developed these pedophilic ideas after he arrived in America has been repeated constantly by people who supported his case. In fact, Amos Yee made a video supporting the legalization of child pornography a year before his asylum case and several months before Melissa had handed him the papers. Amos clearly states in this video that he would watch child pornography because he is curious.
That child pornography should be legal. Now bear in mind, I'm not a pedophile. I really don't want to fuck children, not my style. Lesbians on YouTube will suffice. And also I don't think I'll ever engage in child pornography because the penalties are way too high, unless the laws become abolished and at some point in my life I get interested. Babies are a little more tricky because they can't even talk. To an adult, their movements look arbitrary, and it's hard to interpret whether they are showing approval or not. For example, say an adult rubs his cock on a baby's bum, and the baby seems receptive. But afterwards, the adult plunges his cock into the baby's ass, but then the baby shrieks in terror and then moves away. That is rape. The adult misinterpreted it. The baby only wanted it soft on the outside, but not hard on the inside. Get what I'm saying?
And just as a little end note on this video, something I think you really might appreciate. Remember how I said he did videos like a year ago talking about why child porn should be legal? And did streams advocating for it? Look at the date on the video. July 11th, 2016. Now go look at the date that he applied for and got asylum in the US. December 2016 and March 2017. So the people looking at the asylum applications have this guy show up who's made videos saying, hey, kiddie porn is awesome. Thumbs up, United States. Love watching those toddlers get raped. And they grant him asylum. Let that sink in. He made a video publicly declaring that child pornography is a good thing, and somebody in the United States government would have had to have seen that when they're looking at his application and said, yep, let him in. Green stamp that one. That's somebody we want in this country. What in the fuck?
Amos' history of mental instability was easily identifiable, and his support for pedophilia and child pornography was incredibly easily to find. And it would have been even easier in 2018 when this video was made, because it was on Amos's public YouTube channel. Finding this video took me no effort.
The obvious problem, on hindsight, is that the desire to see him as a figure, as some sort of figure that could take the shape of our own cause, our own very own causes, admittedly led to developing blind spots and biases.
Bias does not explain this irresponsibility in using a mentally disturbed child to grind your axe against Singapore. Melissa either ignored the video in question or did not make any effort to find it. The desire to create Amos into a free speech icon, a vessel in which to pour grievances against Singapore, was more important to these people. Freedom of speech in Singapore is noble. She takes notice that she's damaged the cause she's been fighting. Takes a moment to note the irony of a free speech warrior denigrating Amos's free speech.
There is obviously some irony in the fact that a so-called free speech warrior like me is, actively calling for, advocating for Amos's deplatforming everywhere. And for my critics out there, please, by all means, delight in that irony. It's okay.
If only that process of self-reflection would have reared its head when it wasn't just politically convenient for Melissa. Melissa admits that when Amos arrived in America, that they provided no real-world support for him, that she basically sent in some lackey to visit him once a month, and eventually Amos cut contact with her at around February 2018.
Since ceasing communication with him and being barred from his social media feeds, not a single neuron in my brain was devoted to ever thinking about his existence, with the sole exception of occasional updates from a very kind friend who, every few months, would basically drop in and out of Amos's life to make sure he was doing okay. The spoiler alert is that he really wasn't.
Leaving this young idiot in a foreign country with no familial ties and no cultural knowledge. This is clearly Melissa trying to distance herself from Amos, so it might not be true, but it's just a shocking thing to admit to. What did they think would happen? That Amos would disappear quietly into the night? that he will sit quietly in his room with no friends and contacts to feed his narcissism? That no one would see him as a target to mold for their own interests just like they molded him? That someone would not also sense the opportunity? Because that is what happened. The fact that Amos did not have a handler at his beck and call 24/7 is honestly just gross incompetence. It's a level of stupidity I find difficult to comprehend. Melissa argues that Amos is the way that he is now because the Singaporean government imprisoned Amos.
His narcissistic personality disorder is on an order of magnitude that I doubt history has ever witnessed yet. And he was mentally broken by the time he was released from ICE detention here in the US. Several of us involved in the case suspect that someone must have known of these issues long before the asylum plans were set in motion, but that they were somehow kept from us. But he was molded in a system that was extremely hostile to any remote semblance of non-conformity. And he faced pushback from every aspect of his Singaporean life, from his family, school, social circle. So his neurodivergent idiosyncrasies, instead of being encouraged creatively and intellectually, were constantly suppressed and coerced into submission. The final traumatic nail in the coffin of his mental state might very well have been the loss of his personal freedom when he was charged and sent to jail.
This is not true, in an attempt to absolve responsibility and blame it on Singapore, when in fact her actions were a small but undeniable piece of Amos's decline. Even when she's disavowing Amos, she can't help but use him as a political tool against Singapore. I am railing hard on Melissa because she deserves it. But she is one person. Hundreds of people are guilty of uplifting Amos Yee, giving him a platform, and bringing him to the United States. It was a collective failure made by many different people, seen and unseen, that brought on this situation. When Melissa abandoned Amos, it was truly the final turning point in his fortune, because in the same month, Amos would be banned from social media by higher powers. By this point, YouTube, WordPress, Facebook were all gone. Finally, there were adults in the room that provided the consequences for Amos's actions. This move, above all, destroyed Amos. He lost his platform to push forth his opinion. Naturally, he raged because it was the first time in Amos's entire life he faced real consequences that were not reversed. Amos is still banned.
To frequent. It was a mortal blow, something he never recovered from.
Amos lost everything. There's no other way to put it. Everything. He has faded from public view. Those who supported him have moved on, and no matter how extreme he goes from here on out, there is no way Amos will get the attention he needs unless it's criminal in nature. Amos is still around. Kind of. He has doubled down on his pedophilia activism because he has no choice. The attention he has from pedophiles is now all the attention he will ever get. It is a classic sunk cost fallacy. Amos continues this behavior because he has no choice. It is irrelevant if he truly believes it or not. In a strange country, with no friends, no family, with no hopes of stable employment, no future outside of this underbelly of pedophile activism, Amos has no future beyond what these pedophiles can give to him. The final group of people that will exploit him because they can. He's sort of just been existing. He recently got a small bit of attention after a big-name skeptic made a response video on him, but shortly after that, YouTube banned him again. He's currently on a new website. Amos posts videos that barely reach 400 views apiece, which essentially are just shameless propaganda for the cause. The people that watch these videos are the very definition of a bad crowd, and Amos is forced to pander to them. But there is one video that caught my attention, released on the 23rd of September, 2019, in a video titled, "I Am So Stressed." Amos does something, not for attention, opens up honestly about his feelings.
I'm so stressed. I'm so stressed. Hey, friends. I feel so stressed. I don't know if I'll upload this video, but it seems like for a while, every time I've been in front of the camera, I've been like putting on an act of this really active persona. And so now I'm going to be more like real, naturalistic,
Amos states repeatedly throughout this video that he's not sure if he will even upload it, and because of that, he finally drops the character and becomes honest. Amos does something I previously did not think Amos was even capable of. Self-reflection. Don't get me wrong, his guard is still up, he still plays the clown, and his narcissism continues to rear its ugly head. But there are slips. Amos talks about how he fears the camera, of uploading another video about pedophilia, and he doesn't even understand why.
Because the thing is that, like, I've done the act persona for so long that it causes me stress. Like, now whenever I do that act persona in front of a camera, I feel stressed. Like, the recent video that I filmed, I just felt like so much dread after filming it.
Could it be that his subconscious realizes that what he is doing is wrong, and if he continues going down this path, it will lead to his final destruction? Has Amos realized this? No, of course not. He is not yet that self-aware, but it is an inkling of a human somewhere inside him. That is why he is scared, because Amos has been down this road and he knows it will only lead to more pain. In the video, Amos talks about the past, about a girl, not girlfriends, a girl that he lost due to his behavior. Amos talks about the fact that he was just an asshole, and because of that, he lost more than he was ready to.
You know, the type of person who, you know, you're eating with them, and then, you know, they're so obsessed with studying that you gotta, like, sneak in their book and, like, you know, write notes while they're eating. That kind of person. I had an ex-girlfriend like that once. And that was one of the reasons that broke us up. Not one of the reasons, one of the main reasons. Another big reason is that I was like a colossal dick. But that was one of the reasons. And now I have that problem too. Not the dick problem. The dick problem I think I've generally solved.
Amos speaks of a pedophile friend who I don't think exists, who I think is a stand-in for Amos himself. The friend is suicidal, a person who has lost all hope.
There's this suicidal dude that I know, and I think writes, just give up. He sort of like actively tell them that you should give up. Firstly, that's just not true. It's a very practical goal that, yeah, it's just being a colossal prick. And, like, pedophiles already have troubles, you know, because of how hostile society is towards them. They already have, like, self-esteem issues. For you to, like, then continue saying that to pedophiles, it's... And I think people don't tell him that he's acting like an ass because he's suicidal. But things like you being an ass is probably one of the reasons, big reasons, why you are suicidal. Because that's the thing, if you're suicidal, but you're a really, really nice person, then there is hope that you will stop being depressed and suicidal. Because if you're a nice person, you attract other nice people, and those nice people will be able to help you get out of your whatever issues you have in your life. But if you're a massive dick, no one would want to talk to you unless those other people are as dickish and unlikable and lonely as you. And those kind of people won't help you get out of your life troubles. And no nice people will enter your life because you are such a massive prick. And so you will never be able to get like the warmth and kindness that you need to escape your suicidal ideations.
There are these long, awkward silences of real emotion, where for once Amos does not know what to say, but occasionally punctures it with clumsy attempts at defensive humor. But this only increases the effect. The attempts only bring more attention to the things Amos has lost. The regret, sadness, and pain are palpable. At one point in the video, Amos brings out a plush toy, a representation of a character from the video game Persona 4, and for a few moments, Amos talks about something he loves, a character that has inspired him, that touched him on a human level. For one moment, Amos does not talk about himself, not his situation, not free speech, not pedophilia. Amos talks about something he loves, a plushie called Teddy.
This is Teddy from Persona 4 Golden. This is my favorite character of all time. Teddy. Yeah, no. This is Teddy. He's my favorite character.
But those moments snap away like a light, and the regret, sadness, despair, and pain return. Those long, awkward silences of Amos alone in his room return.
Alright, video's over. Hope you guys have enjoyed this. It's quite different. Some people might be like, the fuck is this? But some people, I don't know, some people might enjoy this, huh? Hey, take care, friends. Hope y'all have a good week.
I detest Amos Yee. He is, without a doubt, the worst person I've ever covered in a video. It would be so easy to wash my hands of him, to tell you things I've told you before about other people. That this is the part of the story where I tell you that Amos was destroyed by his need for attention, destroyed by his narcissism, and his refusal to change, destroyed by a combination of his ego and low intelligence. That is how I've ended every video until now. And if Amos was 10 years older, that is what I'd be doing. But it isn't true or fair. The fact is, this is only one half of why Amos was destroyed. The second major reason is that Amos was used and exploited by people far smarter than him throughout his life. People who weren't even that smart to begin with, but Amos, so intellectually and emotionally stunted that it made him susceptible to manipulation. It started when his parents spoiled him, then the judges of the film fest, culminating in American skeptics and Singaporean actors. Now he's being used by pedophiles to fight for their cause. And it is disgusting. In my mind, there is no difference between advocating for pedophilia and being a pedophile. But Amos Yee was a literal child throughout nearly all the time that has been covered in this video. It is right to argue for different standards, because Amos, by any definition, was different. Different to all other Singaporean kids his age. He could speak English. His narcissism could be interpreted as confidence. He had an American accent, and because of that, he was a marketable product for Western sensibilities. Amos Yee was a carnival freak in which people rolled out to gawk at, a standard bearer for free speech, a vessel to fill for grievances against Singapore. Look at arrogant Amos Yee, who thinks he can be in movies. Isn't he cute? Look at this Singaporean kid who speaks perfect American English. Isn't he different? Look at Amos Yee humping the Quran. Isn't he funny? Look at Amos Yee put in jail by the Singaporean government. Isn't this sad? Isn't it an outrage? Look at Mr. Yee supporting pedophilia. Isn't it so horrifying? Look at Amos. Look at Mr. Yee. Look at me.
Look at me. Look at me. Look at me. Look at me. Look at me as I make love to the Quran.
Amos Yee has said and done unspeakable things. Amos deserves to be shamed, ostracized, and shoved into the dirt by society. There are now allegations against him that he sent nude photos to a 14-year-old girl. That is just unforgivable. But even if it's not, advocating pedophilia is also unforgivable, and because of that, and because of these issues, Amos should be destroyed. But I still can't shake this feeling. Amos was a child. His actions as an adult were a direct consequence of how people treated him as a child. Amos was exploited by those who should have known better. The Singaporean government caught a lot of flack for trying Amos as an adult under their law.
The youngest prisoner of conscience. Not only was he incarcerated in adult and not juvenile jail,
but everyone treated him as an adult. He wasn't. Amos Yee was a kid. When Amos should have been talking with his friends about football tryouts at age 11, he was used by his local newspaper to sell movie tickets. When Amos should have been chasing girls at his local high school at 15, he was used as a political tool against Singapore. When Amos should have been planning to go to university at 17, he was held in an American detention facility as an asylum seeker, used by the skeptics as a free speech icon. Every single moment of Amos's life, he was used by people smarter than he was. They exploited him because they could. They stole those years from him. They abused and abused the young village idiot. Amos Yee was a child, but he never had a childhood. Is it any wonder that he developed an ideology in which children were sexually treated the exact same way Amos was treated emotionally and intellectually?
You must grab them when they're still young, you know.
Amos is as good as dead. When I wrote this script in the August of 2019, Amos Yee was 20 years old. If he was anyone else, his life would have just begun. But Amos Yee's life is over. He has no future. When Amos Yee walks down the street, they will occasionally hiss and jeer, but the overwhelming majority will not know or care for him. Amos Yee's future is one of mediocrity, melancholy, and prison. No one is ever gonna feel bad for the injustice done to Amos Yee. In 5 years, most people won't even remember what happened. For the rest of Amos's life, he will continue to scream, "Look at me!" But no one is looking now.
Jen, my best friend, she has cancer.
You see, I don't usually make Singaporean-oriented videos because I'm so American. But I'm going to compare him to someone that people haven't really mentioned before. Lee Kuan Yew is dead. Fine. And the arrogance of that analogy is, yeah, see how Christians seem to be a really big fan.
The prosecution lawyer had asked the judge to fix an early date, noting that Yee had upped the tempo and offensiveness of his posts in a bid to gain attention.
In the United States, and many people like myself supported that. Supported him coming here.
Thumbs up, United States. Love watching those toddlers get raped. And they grant him asylum. Let that fucking sink in.
Have a nice civil discussion on pedophilia.
He made a video publicly declaring that child pornography is a good thing, and somebody in the United States government would have had to have seen that when they're looking at his application and said, yep.
Not a single neuron in my brain was devoted to ever thinking about his existence.
The reason why I have such a big problem with Amos Yee is he's a fucking brat. He's a spoiled, obnoxious little brat who has no conceptual understanding of what he's fucking.
Meanwhile, those who unfortunately win are the dirty, underhanded Machiavellian readers of Robert Greene who understand the masses' requirement is addiction in order for guidance.
Seriously, you're a brave warrior for all the right things, and anything I can do for you, please let me know.
Just spread the word, Ruben. Spread the word. That's all I need, buddy.
Oh, man.
Go us.
Listen, you absolutely have an ally in me. I promise you that.
I say this not at all in an attempt to justify his actions today, but to suggest that, Amos did not happen in a vacuum. The devils of his worst nature were instead stoked and inflamed by certain experiences.